Joey. If you have been watching my DIY videos recently, you have noticed that I normally film them with the camera above my head, shining down on my hands, showing my work, and I have little blurbs that pop up on the screen to tell you little tips and pointers and whatnot. I am not comfortable being in front of a camera, and I usually don't like hearing or seeing myself on film, so that is the reason why I have the camera usually above my head. However, I have been encouraged by my family and friends to get in front of the camera and let you guys meet me and just know who I am, the person behind the videos, I guess, and behind some of the artwork if you follow me on my Instagram or Facebook. And like I said, I'm not comfortable with this. So today I'm getting my feet wet and just trying something really simple, really easy. This was a request from one of my followers. I recently put out a video and asked people what they would like to see. If there were any requests they had as far as DIY items, art, that kind of thing. Most of my videos up to now have been more of the DIY variety. I've been getting things from Dollar General, Dollar Tree, upcycling them, making them a little cuter, painting them, that type of thing. But this one is a little more in the artistic realm. So I figured today would be a good day to step into being in front of the camera and sharing some of this stuff with you. One of the main reasons is being out of necessity. There are a lot of steps to this, even though it's very simple. There's a lot of notes and a lot of information you need on this, and I felt like if I put a lot of words along with the video, it would be very hard to watch and get frustrating, and you would be focusing on trying to read and trying to watch the video, and I know I personally wouldn't really want to watch that. So as I said, this would be a good opportunity to teach this. But the lady that sent these pictures to me of these little wooden blocks, I found these at a gift shop. She loved them. She wants to do some of her own, but she wasn't really sure exactly what products to use. She sent me a lot of pictures, and they were super cute. And as you can tell, I don't know if you can really see the texture from here. I'll try to tilt them a little bit. They're very textured. It's just a little wooden block. There's a little bit of a iridescent gold highlight to them. But she sent numerous pictures of numerous designs. So I started out very simple. I obviously just did a little heart with some polka dots on it. Today we'll be doing something a little different. We'll be doing a flower today. I felt the heart was almost too simple. So if you can do the flower, then the heart will be super easy for you to do. It's just a regular old 2x4 cut down into pieces. You can also use 2x6s, anything that will stand up on its own. You can cut some at a point at the top. I actually have some of those that my husband cut, and I'm planning on maybe turning those into churches, so I think that would be really cute. There's the rectangular size as well. Anything that will stand up. Obviously, the first thing you're going to do is cut the blocks down to whatever size. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't think we even measured these. We just eyeballed it, just cut them. If you have scrap 2x4s laying around, yeah, most people do. If you're like our family, we do lots of little projects. We have pieces of scrap, everything left over, and we have a tendency to hoard these type of materials. We don't throw anything away. So these were readily available to us and didn't cost a thing. They were just left over from other projects that we've done. So as far as the materials you're going to need, obviously you will need a block of wood. I have sanded them down just a little bit. You don't need to get crazy with the sanding because you are going to be covering them with a lot of texture, so they'll be rough anyway. Just get the splinters off so that it doesn't flake off, stick in your finger, any of that good stuff. So the most important thing you're going to need for this is the molding paste. And there you go. That's a picture of the molding paste. It's made by Golden. This I found, I love Golden products. They're just made very well. This is really, really thick. I wanted this consistency to be as thick as I could possibly get it. So this worked really well for me. There are videos online where you can try to make your own. I don't think I would suggest that, just because you don't really know how well it preserves. If you go back to the days of paper mache, I'm sure you guys have done this in elementary school. You do the flour in the water and I think the school glue, and you dip your newspaper in it and smear it over a balloon or something. I think we made globes or something out of it. But if you get it too thick and too wet and it takes too long to dry, it will mold. And I'm sure you've noticed that with, if your kids have done it as well. So I was a little hesitant to make my own. If you have done it and it works well for you, then by all means use it. I just haven't delved into that arena yet. So I just went ahead and got the golden paste. Now, there is a downside to this. It is a little pricey. This was like 18 bucks for this little bottle here. If you get more, I believe you can get like a half-gallon size. It ends up being cheaper per ounce. So if you're going to do a lot of these, it might be worth the money to try to get a bigger one. And I found that I kind of like these, so I probably will end up getting a bigger tub of that. Also, you will need palette knives. I've got a huge assortment here of all different shapes and sizes and whatnot. But for our purposes today, just a basic artist palette knife. And I'll try to hold that up so you can see it a little bit. You can use plastic as well. I've got a little plastic one here. Pretty much the same thing. I just tend to use the metal because I'm used to them, and I like the little bend in the handle. It allows me to maneuver it just a little bit better. An old paintbrush, I would not suggest using a really good one because this is pretty rough wood. The texture on here is pretty rough as well. And in case you happen to smear over this and find that this is not quite dry, it's just kind of hard on your brushes. So I would suggest just an old one. This is palette paper. If you are familiar with painting, you've probably seen the palettes. They're this square boxes with a rubber lid. You put this paper in the bottom, put your paint on it, and if you step away for any reason, you can actually put a lid on it and seal it, and that way it doesn't dry out on you. So I just used the paper, folded it in half, and laid it here. I really wanted the space to be able to get in here and really mix up this molding compound, because I felt like in a plastic palette I couldn't get down in there and work it as well as I needed to. And also this can be used as a little bit of a practice sheet before you actually go to put this on the wood, just to smear it around and feel how this molding paste works. My block that I'm starting with today, I've got it on wax paper. That way I don't have to try to pick this block up and flip it around and move it. I can just kind of spin my wax paper around like this and maneuver it just a little bit better. Your paint, you will be mixing paint with the molding paste. If you notice, the molding paste is white-ish. It has a little bit of a grayish tinge to it. I don't particularly like the gray, so I did add white to mine to do this. And it doesn't take much, just enough to brighten it up a little bit. And as far as the colors, on this one, the little heart is a robin's egg blue, and I used, after it was dry, I used a little bit of the gold acrylic paint on there. The type of acrylic paint you need to use is really important. I would not use the craft paints that are in the little bottles. If you're familiar with the little acrylic crafters things, they're really runny. It will thin this down a lot and make it too runny. So I would not suggest putting that in here. It would work in it. It's not going to hurt it, but it will thin it down a lot, and you won't get the consistency that you would have otherwise. You wouldn't get the little peaks in it, and you wouldn't get that really pretty texture. So as far as the acrylic paint, I used, you can use a few, but anything that's a medium to a heavy body acrylic paint. And you'll be able to tell in the tubes. Most of them will say medium body, heavy body. anything like that's going to work. Something that's a little thicker. Most things that come in a tube are going to be just fine. This is the Grumbacher Academy. It works just fine. This is the Arteza acrylic colors. I really like these. You can also get, to save a little bit of money, you can get the Hobby Lobby brand. This is just Master's Touch. Anything Master's Touch is the Hobby Lobby brand. So you can also use that. It is a little bit thinner than the others, so keep that in mind. And also keep in mind when you're mixing colors in with the modeling paste, this almost acts like a white paint. So if you mix red, a tiny little bit of red in with this white, you're going to get pink, just like you would mixing red and white paint together. So if you want a really bold color, you are going to need to use more paint. So for this, you can see I used a lighter color. The pastel colors seem to do a little better just because you don't have to mix so much in there. So that just tends to be a good little point. You can do the bright colors, but just keep in mind you are going to use a lot of paint if you do that to keep it really, really bright. So to prep these blocks, obviously, I said, sand it down, which I've already done with this one. And if you will look at this one, I'll try to hold it up. The bottom of this, you can still see the texture of the wood. I did not put the texture medium on the bottom, simply because I did not want this to wobble. If I sit it on a shelf or a table, I was afraid if I had too much texture on it, it was going to just kind of rock back and forth, which wouldn't be a huge problem, but it would be kind of annoying, and you would waste your textile medium or your texture medium on the bottom. There's really no need to put it there if you're not going to see it. So I just put a thin coat of white, just a little wash to seal it. You don't have to put it anywhere else. I did put a thin coat on the back. If you notice, it is not as textured. It's put on with a palette knife, but a lot thinner. And the reason behind that is it's just going to be at the back. You're not really going to see it. If you do have it on a table and you walk around behind it and you do happen to see the back, then it looks finished, but you're not using so much of the product on the block. As I said, you do use a good bit of it, and it is a little pricey, so that just kind of saves you a little bit there. So mainly, you're wanting to put it heavy, the front, both sides, and the top. And that's your main areas to cover. Those will be the areas that you put on pretty thick. So I have got one that I've already prepped. I have not painted the bottom yet. I still need to do that. But again, I did the back really, really thin. You can kind of see through that. It's super thin. And the front is a little bit thicker, and obviously the top. And this one, as I said, I'm going to do a little different. This was going to be a flower. I wanted to use the heart as an example, but I felt like it was very, very simple. So we'll go into doing the flower, something a little bit different. And I'm going to use coordinating colors so they kind of look cute together. If you want to put them as a grouping, they look really cute stacked up with each other. So I did one in advance, mainly because I wanted to go ahead and step ahead in this video and not have to wait on it. If you put this on relatively heavy, this particular block here and this one took roughly 4 hours for the molding paste to dry. I would suggest, if you're wanting to do a lot of these especially, do them late in the evening, get them all done at one time, and put them up, let them dry overnight. And that way you get in the next day, when you start working on actually putting the details and color on them, you can just dive right in, and you're not juggling, trying to figure out which one's dry, which one's not. It just seems to be a little bit easier. They do take a while to dry. And once you get your final product on, like the heart on this one, it will definitely need to sit overnight. It does take quite a while to dry, but the effects are worth it. They're really cute. So we will jump right in. As far as measuring out how much you need, that is something I have not quite figured out yet. It's almost like icing a cake. If you notice, sometimes when you ice a cake, if you put it on kind of thin, you don't use much icing. If you put it on thick, you use a lot more. If you're doing decorative effects for the cake, like little rosettes, that type of thing, you use a lot more, obviously. So it's going to vary greatly on which type you do. So I found I just kind of dive right in it and scoop it out and use the palette knife for that. And I've got it, I hope you can see this, it's white on white, it's very hard to see. But I've got a good little bit out here. If you're going with a color, try not to mix a crazy color, because if you do run out and you need to mix more, then you're going back trying to figure out your percentages of color that you use to make a particular shade. I would stick with just a color straight out of the tube until you've got it figured out, and if you've done a couple, then you can, you know, get a little recipe down for that. So I've got this here. Got it all smooshed out. And I've got just a little tube of white paint. And as I said before, this is white. So it's going to show up white. It just has that little tinge that's a little off. I just didn't think it was quite bright enough. So I'm going to add in, let's see if you can see, I'm not adding much at all. So there's just a little dollop of white there. And you can see how brighter that is than the other. It's just to brighten it up a little bit, and honestly I may not have enough in there on that one. So when you go to mix it in with the palette knife, this is where having this paper on your table really comes in handy, because you can really get in there and work this stuff. It is very, very thick, but it is very easy to also use all of it because you can scrape it up with the palette knife. So you just mix it up until all of that color is incorporated in there. Obviously with the white, it's a little harder to tell. If you're using a color, it'll be a little more obvious when you've got the color all mixed in. So to smear it on, like I said, we're going to paint the bottom of this one. I'm not going to do it right now. But this particular block, actually all of the sides are pretty nice. If you happen to get a block that has a really ugly spot on the back or on one side, make that the back. You can cover it. Even if it has a little rough spot on it, it's easy to fix because this is so textured. You're not really going to see that anyway. So I usually, what I found is I go in and do just a really thin little bit on the back. This is going to be the back of my block. And again, this is just like icing a cake. If you're familiar with icing a cake, you can do this. And if you really want to save some of the modeling paste here, you can pre-paint the block whatever color you're going to be doing. So this one, for instance, I could have pre-painted the whole thing white and then go in with this little thin coat. And then if there are any little areas of wood that show through, you can kind of see here. If I scratch down just a little bit, you can see you get back down into the wood again. But I want mine to look a little more rustic and beat up, so I'm not really concerned about that showing through that much. So that will be the back. And the more you push down on this palette knife, the more you're going to be able to smooth this stuff down. So right now I've got the back done. You see it's just kind of smeared on there. Not super thick. So then we're going to go back and do the sides and do the top end. I may do a little fast forward through this section because this can get a little boring to watch. get down at the bottom, you kind of have to go across a little bit, smear it. And it will stick to your wax paper a little bit. That's another reason to use the wax paper, so when it does dry, you can just peel it right off. It's not like normal paper. If you sit it on cardboard or something, you're going to end up pulling the paper fibers off with it and have kind of a mess. Okay, there we go. We have it all covered. And I think you can see with that light the texture pretty well without me having to pick it up. So you notice the front is put on pretty thick, the back a little bit thinner. But it is very textured, and it almost resembles like a stucco wall. So if you have a block wall that has that texture on it, it looks very similar to that. So as I said before, this is going to have to sit and dry for roughly 4 hours, maybe a little bit more, depends on the humidity level and also how thick you put it on there. If you put it super thick, it's going to make a big difference. So this is now this. This is going to sit over here and dry for a while. So now we're back to our original block, and this one I actually put on a little thinner. If you noticed, it's not quite as textured as the other, and I don't think it really matters. It's just a matter of preference, whatever you like to see. And sorry, my dog's barking. But I have not painted the bottom yet. I will do that. I may just go back and do that at the end. So think of your design that you want to do. And as I said before, we're going to do a flower. It's going to be very simple. And the shape and the design that you come up with will determine what type of palette knife that you use. So if you're going to use something that has big round petals on it, like a big rose or something, then I would suggest, use a palette knife, something like this. That way you have that really wide surface. You can smear it out. If you want something that has some ripples in it, then you've got this, something like this. I don't know if you can see. Maybe you should hold it down here. There you go. You can see it has like little ripples and texture in it. You can get some neat little effects that way. So depending on what you're wanting to make, I think that will determine what your palette knife is. So you can experiment and practice. And that's another reason I have this palette paper out. Let me see, I've got still a good bit of product on here. I'm going to scrape it up so we don't waste it. But this also allows you to have a practice sheet. So when you do mix up a color and you're practicing doing a little stroke with this, you can do it on the paper before you actually go to the wood, just to get a feel for how it works. Because it is very much like cake decorating, like I said. But there are some differences in it because you are painting with a palette knife. So you may want to get in there and just play around with it a little bit and see what kind of shapes you get with the different palette knives. So first thing I want to do is the stem. Now I know I'm not going to need a whole lot because it's just going to be one little swash going from about the middle straight down. And I will be using this little palette knife here to do it. So I'm going to use this Master's Touch. It's this really funky colored green, and I just like the green. I think it's really pretty. I'm not going to use much at all. I want this to stay really pastel colored. So if you look here, it's just a little dot. Just a tiny little dot of this stuff. And I am going to pull out just a tiny bit more of the modeling paste. I don't think I'm going to need much. Like I said, I'm just going to do a stem, so it's not going to take a lot. So when I go to mix this, you see, you just scrape it over. And this was what I was saying before. Whenever you mix any color in with this modeling paste, it will lighten a lot. So you see here how light this is. So it's just like mixing any color with white. You automatically are going to get a lighter shade. So just keep that in mind with whatever colors you're mixing up. But I wanted this to be very pastel and very light because I want it to be springy. So if you look, this color ends up being a lot lighter whenever you mix it all together. So to do the stem, you're really just gonna scoop and just drag. And this is where this paper comes in handy too. And again, if you don't have this, a sheet of wax paper is totally fine. But you're gonna paint, you're painting with the back of your palette knife. You see, this is the top. I barely have any product on there at all. This is the back. And you see this stuff is really thick. It's not going anywhere. So all the product is on the back of it. This is what you use to maneuver the paint and manipulate it. So when you go to paint the stem, you're going to have product, as I said, on the back of your knife. And again, practice on your paper. You're just going to drag it. And if it starts to disappear and you find that it's not covering, just go back, scoop up a little bit more of the product and go back over it again. So you're just making a stripe with this. So I'm going to scrape it all back up again. So I want you guys to be able to see a little better what I'm doing. So I'm going to hold it kind of right here at an angle. And this is the top, obviously, where the flower is going to be. This will be the stem. So I'm getting, I don't want my stem to be really, really wide. So I'm not going to get a whole lot on here, just a tiny little bit. I'm going to start about halfway down. And I'm going to try to do this backwards, so bear with me. I'm just going to pull straight down. And it doesn't really cover, it's kind of hard to see because it's so light, but I'll hold it right there, you can see a little better. We'll go back and add more. And I want mine to be pretty textured, so I'm actually going over this 3 or 4 times. And as I said before, use a really, really light touch. If you really push down on this, you're gonna pull a lot of your product away, so you can kind of see there. Just a little bit. And I am gonna use this to do a couple little leaves on here too. So again, practice on your paper first on that as well. So on here, you can kind of see on the paper. I'm just going to smoosh down and go out a little. Smoosh down. You can see it kind of, you get a little leaf shape. So it's just like painting with cake icing. So again, I'm going to scoop all this back up. Okay, so I adjusted the camera just a little bit. I felt like with this being so light and the light was reflecting off of it a little, you couldn't really see what I was doing. So this is a little wonky angle, but I think it'll help you see just a little bit better. So this is what I've done so far, and it's just a little stripe of paint right down the center. So, and I think you guys can see if I do it right there. Pull a little of that off. So I'm going to push here, pull it down, get a little bit more. As I said before, use a really light touch on this. If you push down really hard, you're going to end up scraping a lot of it off. Okay, and you got your little leaf on the bottom. And I think I might extend my stem up just a little bit more, but not too much. And you see it looks really rough, it's really textured, but that's okay. It's a little bit of the charm of these things. They're not made to be perfect. They're just smeared on. They're little fun decorative pieces. I'll let you go back and look. This is the heart I did. Now you can see the texture a little bit better in that one. It's just smeared on there, and I used the same palette knife, and I just basically smeared it on like you were spreading cake icing. And the dots I did with rubber gloves and just my finger. So you see, even the dots, they're not perfectly round. So don't worry about this being really perfect. This is just supposed to be fun, a little whimsy. Some fresh paper and rinse this off. Oh yeah, and when you clean these off, use an old icky paint rag or a paper towel, because you are going to get this pretty nasty, and you will get this on your hands. It does wash off easily, so don't worry about that either. Okay, so for the petals, I want to use little peach color, and this is the Master's Touch, again, the Hobby Lobby brand, something really inexpensive. I'm trying to use stuff that's a little more readily accessible that you can just go out and purchase really quickly. So I've got just a little bit this peachy pink color. I want my flower to be really pale, nice and springy looking. So, here we go. We've got more of our molding paste. The center of my flower will be roughly right here. So I'm going to take that into consideration, and I'm going to try to hold this where you guys can see me. I'm going to come from out here. I'm going to push down and pull to the center. You see I've got one little petal there. Down and pull to the center. So guys, my air conditioning just come on, so I hope that doesn't interfere with the sound. And if you don't get enough on there at first, it's easy just to add a little bit more to it. It's always easier to add more than it is to take away, because once you get it on there, it's kind of hard to get it back off. to the center. Push down. Pull to the center. Push down. Oops. Push down. Pull to the center. And at this point, you can go back in and maneuver your petals a little bit. Some of mine I wasn't especially happy with, so I'm going to go back in and just maneuver them around a little bit. As I said, this is something new for me. I am far from an expert on this. This is just what I found from experimenting with this. Decided to make my petals just a little bit chunkier. You see I've got it smeared on right there. So now at this point, one other thing you can do, I'll clear my palette knife off. If you want to make it look like there's a little fold in the petal, you can come in and hold your knife at a little bit of an angle. See what I'm doing here? I'm just pulling on one half of the petal back towards the center again, but I've got my palette knife angled. You see it just leaves like a little fold in the middle of the petal. And some of these techniques, like I said, if you are familiar with cake decorating, it's going to be very similar. Then you can actually go back on the other side if you want and pull that angle in a little bit more on the other side. And it gives the petal just a little bit more dimension. So at this stage, you can just play with it a lot. Just kind of smush it around. You see, it's very, very heavy. You can see the dimension on that. Pretty thick. So now for the center, and as you probably can tell by now, I hate wasting product. So I want to do like a gray in the center of this. So instead of pulling out a bunch of the molding paste again, I've got a little bit of this pink left over. So we're going to experiment just a tiny little bit. I've got just the least little bit of black here. I'm just about out, which is fine because I don't need much at all. I'm going to squeeze out just a tiny little bit here. Oops, never mind. It was a lot. So we won't use much of that. So since I got way too much black paint, I'm only going to just touch it in here. Just see, there's just a teeny tiny little bit. I'm going to mix that in with my pink. And this should still give me a gray color. Almost like a purpley gray, which is actually kind of pretty. So I think we're going to go with it since I've got that little color mixed up. I kind of like it. The purple is pretty. Oh, and if you don't have wax paper, a paper plate would work for this too. Anything that's kind of coated and slick will work. I wouldn't use just straight paper or the Chinette type plates that are rough, because I feel like it'll probably dig in and start pulling the paper fibers up. So just make sure it's something that's coated and it's got a little bit of a slick surface to it. And I have some gloves on. They do need to fit pretty tightly. If you have gloves that flop over on the end, you're going to find that when you get a dollop of this on your finger, it's hard to control it. The little flap of plastic wants to stick out of the end and move around, and it's hard to control. So make sure they fit pretty snug. So I'm going to go in and just get a dollop of this on my finger, just like finger painting. And again, if you want to practice on the paper first, I'd rather you do that and make a mistake there than do it on your flower. So you can start here and just wiggle it around. And you just kind of make a little dollop in the circle. But you are going to have to use a lot of this in the center. Otherwise, you're going to start pulling a lot of that pink, because it's still wet. You're going to start pulling that pink into the purple, and it might mess it up for you. So I'm going to pull all of this purple that we mixed up. Now, see, I've got a big glob of this on here. Push it right in the center. Start working it around. You can kind of see it almost makes like a little Hershey kiss shape in the center. I think I actually want to put a little bit more. I'm going to get my palette knife, scrape off another glob right there. I really want mine to be textured. And you'll see I still pulled just a little bit of that pink in there. If you want to wait till the pink dries, you can. It's just going to add a lot of time to this little project. But if it brings a little bit of color into it, it's actually not that big of a deal. These are supposed to be fun and colorful, so it's not a problem. So now, you need to put this up and let it dry. My little heart here, I would estimate that it took roughly 6 to 8 hours to dry. This is pretty thick. So I have a feeling this may be something we'll have to sit for quite some time. Okay guys, we are back. It has been about 5.5 hours. I was going to let this sit overnight, but I thought it was drying a little quicker than I anticipated. My studio is quite dry. I run dehumidifiers in here to protect the artwork. So with it being so dry, I think that helped with the drying process just a little bit. So as you can see, it is dry. And while this was drying, I worked on a little update on the heart. If you noticed before, it was a little bit lighter and it just didn't have quite the detail I wanted it to. So the more I looked at it, the more I thought I needed to age it a little bit more. So I'm gonna come in just a little closer, and you can see the little antiquing that I did on that. It was done on the previous version. It was just lighter, so I felt like I needed to age it just a little bit more. I wanted it to look a little older, give it a little more character. So I do think this looks better. So you can kind of see all the little dark places on it, and I will show you how to do that on this one. So I also, after it dried, I did take it outside, and I'll pull it back so you can see it right there. And I did a light clear coat on it. I used satin. This is the Krylon Color Max. If it's an art piece such as canvas, I would absolutely use something made specifically for art. There's a couple of different brands out there you can get at Hobby Lobby, but since this is kind of a crafty project, I thought this would be safe, and I tested it out, and it's done beautifully, so not a problem. And the reason we're doing that is we want to seal it just a bit before we do this little aging. This molding paste, whenever you put it on, after it dries, it is a little absorbent, so it will soak up some of your paint, and it's hard to age it that way. So I like to have just a little bit of a finish on it. You can put a glossy finish if you like. I prefer the matte or satin just because I don't like all the shiny effect on it. So take it out, a really light coat. You don't have to do anything super heavy. So what I'm going to do now is do the aging on it and the antiquing. Okay, it's sitting a little crooked, but that's okay. I want you to be able to see what I'm doing, and it is cutting my head off, but I don't mind that. It's okay. So I use, for this, I do use the craft paint. This is what I was talking about before, that I did not advise mixing with the molding paste just because it was so runny. And this step of it, I do prefer that the paint be a little runnier, so that's why I'm going with this little guy. And I'm actually going to thin it down even more. So, and obviously this thing has been used a lot. This is not actually a palette. I use it as a palette. I don't know if you guys remember back in the 70s, the really heavy plastic plates. I don't know the brand name of them. I'm actually dump paint on my head. I don't remember the name of them, but you guys might remember. But they're really hard plastic. My grandmother was going to throw them out because she didn't use them anymore, and they make a perfect palette. So if you come across these old things, they really work well. But, okay, so this is my paint. It's just a brown, really dark, and I am watering it down just a bit. So you see, it's almost to the point where it can drip, but not quite. So now, what I'm going to do is brush this all over top. And I know this looks really bad. Don't panic. There is a method to this. And again, this is why I was saying not to use a really good brush, because this is pretty hard on your brush, trying to push it down in all these little crevices. Okay, so you see we got it brushed on there. It looks really, really icky. So get an old cloth, and you're going to start wiping this back off. Now, if you want it to look really, really aged, just barely wipe it off and leave it really, really dark. For mine, I think I want to wipe off just a little bit more. I want mine just to look a little springier. I want that white to pop out a little. And if you find it still just a little bit too dark, just dip your old cloth into a little bit of water, clean water, and just kind of wipe off some of that excess too. That will help. And if you notice, my stem, it still isn't quite standing out as much as I want it to. So I'm going to go in with a little more brown. And I'm going in pretty heavy here. And I'm not thinning it down much at all this time. So I just went on either side of the stem. And I'm going to barely wipe this off. I feel like my stem did not quite stand out as much as I wanted it to. And the leaf as well. So now it stands out just a little bit better. It just aged it a little more. Okay. We've got that portion done. Now we're going to do the sides and the back. And you do not have to age this if you don't want to do this little wash on it. I just think it adds a little bit of character, a little bit of dimension to it. It's just my preference, but you can do this with whatever color you like. If you want to make it look really aged, especially if you were doing something that was Halloween related, you could do this wash in a black and make it look just really old and creepy. If you wanted something a little more like with the farmhouse theme, you could go with a gray and do your accents that way. I think that would be really pretty as well. Okay, so now we've got this. You can do the back if you like. I might do just a little thin wash on the back. Again, it's not going to be seen as much, so it's not quite as pressing. But if you feel like you're going to put it somewhere where someone will see the back, you don't want just a raw piece of wood sticking out there and looking kind of ugly. So you will definitely need a bunch of old cloths for this. Paper towels don't hold up very well. You'll get little fibers on everything. You do need a soft cotton cloth. I get these at hardware stores. They come in a big bag and it's just old shop towels. They are great for this kind of stuff. You can see I've used mine a lot. And when I'm done, I kind of toss it into a pile until I get enough to put in the wash. Then I'll throw them through the washing machine. The color does not come out of it, but it does soften them up a little where you can use them again. So all these colors you see on here is just dried paint. But they do work well for stuff like this. So now, we've got all this done. And it's already super cute, but I still think we need to add a little bit of our gold to it. It almost has a little gold tone already. But for this, I use the Arteza acrylic colors. And I have a whole set of nothing but the metallics. And they are really, really pretty. They're thick. The colors are really vibrant. They just work really well. So I would suggest the Arteza for that. And I'm not getting paid to say I like the Arteza. I just really do like them. Now for this step, you don't necessarily have to use a glove. It's up to you. And you do not use much paint at all. You're barely brushing this gold on there. So you see I've got just a tiny little dollop of it. You can see on my icky little paint tray there, just a tiny little bit. Okay, so for doing this, you want to get a little bit on your fingertip, brush most of the excess off. You don't want to glob. You can see it's not a whole lot on here. If you want to experiment a little bit over on your paper to see how it's going to look when you rub it on there, you can do that. But very little. As I've said before, it's always easier to add more than it is to take away. So use it sparingly at first. So what we're going to do is just on these raised edges, the little parts that you see sticking out, we're going to get just little bits of gold and just barely rub it over top of that raised surface. Don't push it down into the little deep areas. Just get it right on those little raised spots there. And then we'll also put a little bit on the stem. You have to be really careful there because that's really skinny. It'd be easy to get it onto the white area. Okay, so now you can see when the light hits it, that little bit of gold that's over it. And I think I would like a little bit in the center of the flower. So I am gonna get a little more of a glob on the end of my finger and kind of push it down in the center a little. I just want a little more gold there, just to make it a little shinier. And I also think, I'm a big fan of polka dots, obviously, from this one. And I think while I have this out, I think I'm gonna add a little more gold to it because I really like the gold. You can never have too much bling on this kind of stuff, so let's add a little bit more. Much better. I like that. Okay. So now I think I do want to put more polka dots, but I don't want them to be very big, so I'm not going to use my fingertips for this. I am going to use a Q-tip, and I use Q-tips a lot for painting. I will use them especially to make polka dots. You can go different sizes with them. So if you see, you've got like really huge ones, and that's even bigger. And then they go down to small sizes, like this. And then they even go down to little tiny ones, like the normal cotton swabs that you use. So for the little ones though, I would recommend just a normal cotton swab. These are a little more compact, they don't tend to fuzz as much as a regular Q-tip. I know those, they tend to spray out and you'll get little hairs and fibers coming off of them. So this, you don't have to quite worry about that as much. Okay, so I'm gonna lay this little heart down. I'm gonna pull it back this way so you guys can see it. And I think I'm gonna try to paint it, actually, I'm gonna paint it upside down so you guys can see it a little better. But if you see this little Q-tip, if you look on the end, see it's gonna make a perfect little dot. So I'm gonna go and just put a few little polka dots on here in the gold, just to brighten it up a little. And again, these do not have to be perfect. Do not feel like if your circle is a little bit of an egg shape or something, it's no big deal. These are supposed to look old and rustic and beat up. I made that one kind of big. Okay. All right, there we go. And I think the polka dots made it. I'm a little funny about polka dots. I put them on everything anyway. I don't think I'm gonna put them on the side. I think I might get that's a little too carried away, I believe. So, and the good thing about these two is that paint that's on there, when you get a little excess, just wipe it off on your old paint cloth, let it dry, and you can use these again. I've used these 3 and 4 times before they start to really fall apart. All right, so this is our little flower, little dimensional flower made with golden modeling paste. Water. Here is our little heart going with it. So these are super cute, and you can tell if you put these in a group, They would be really cute together. Put one here, maybe do another little small one here with a bee or another flower. Gosh, there's lots of little things you can do. So that's it. Okay guys, we are done. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. And I know this video went a little longer than I anticipated, mainly because I'm a little chatty. I need to work on that. But this is a learning process for me, so bear with me. Again, I thank you for hanging out. And for the ones that asked for this little project, let me know what you think. If there's something you want to see a little different, some different colors maybe, please let me know and I will see what I can come up with. I do know, since I really do like this technique, I think my next project is going to be a little church. I have some 2x6s that my husband cut down for me, and they are in the point. So I think I'm going to turn those into little churches and find me some little wooden crosses that I can drill a hole in the top, insert them down in it, and make them a little more dimensional, a little more interesting. Those would fit in with the Easter decor as well. I think that would be really pretty. So you guys, if you have any more ideas for these, a theme that I can put on them, please let me know. Comment, give me some suggestions. If you've done this before and you found something that works a little better, please let me know. I love constructive criticism. I do not mind it at all. And as I said, I'm not used to doing these videos and being in front of the camera, so I will be learning along the way. And I appreciate you guys hanging out with me today. Thanks, and have fun painting.